say, and she was always very good at making people feel at her ease. And then in relation to her staff and the people that worked for her, she had a real genuine interest in her staff, in her household, and it doesn't matter what position in the hierarchy you stood. She treated everybody very much the same. I can remember, for example, sitting on a grouse moor with her before my children were born in 1997, my twins, and she was very interested in the fact that my wife's going to have twins at that time, and subsequently would always ask about them. So a very human, a very passionate, compassionate woman, and yes, I mean, it was a unique experience for me for 20 years to be employed in that way, looking after various members of the royal family, but latterly the Queen. And it was one of those experiences where you weren't a friend, you were a protection officer, but you, by definition, were there all the moments. So for me, the 2 years that stood out greatly were 1997, of course, when the Princess of Wales died. And I was at Balmoral, I was the Queen's police officer, so I was probably the second person in the United Kingdom to know that she had died, and all that went on that week, when there was a little criticism of her because she wasn't coming down to London. But for those of us that were there and seeing the distress of the two boys that had just lost their mother, I'm absolutely convinced in my own mind that she did exactly the right thing by being in Scotland and being the grandmother that she was to those, to Prince William and to Prince Harry. And then, of course, I was there in 1992, which she described as a pretty horrible year when things were going wrong in the family, and then that dreadful disaster of the fire at Windsor. But she is very stoic, was very stoic, had a huge amount of common sense, had a huge amount of wisdom, and it's an end of an era, as someone recently said on your program. She was really a very amazing woman, and I thought it was no coincidence really that there was a rainbow over Windsor Castle yesterday, shortly after the announcement was made. She was a godly woman. She had a great faith, and in a sense, she had a full life. She lived to 96. And for those of us that are Christian, we do not believe that death is the end, but it's rather a gateway. And so, although we mourn her loss and feel tremendous sadness for her family, I feel that she's reunited with her husband and in a better place now.
Well, you're talking about 2 seismic years for Her Majesty then, and I just wanted to go back on what you were saying about being there when the news came through about Diana. What was the sense of shock in the room at this, extraordinary event that nobody could have predicted, which had such major potential consequences for the royal family?
Yes, I think, the Queen's death and the Princess of Wales' death were very different, obviously, because the Queen was 96. And as Prime Minister, late Prime Minister said, don't expect everyone to live forever. But Princess of Wales was obviously different because that was a huge shock, and it happened in the middle of the night. So, I was the first person that was told, because I was told by the police control room that she'd been involved in an accident, and subsequently had to get the wheels in motion. So I got the private secretary out of bed who lived on the estate at Balmoral, and then I think the whole family were absolutely devastated by the news that the Princess of Wales had died, and the outpouring of grief that happened was unique in that time. And I think we're going to see a similar sort of outpouring of grief and loss now because of the Queen's death. I mean, it was a shock for the whole family in 1997, and although we don't expect everyone to live forever, excuse me, it is a shock that the Queen has died yesterday.
Well, we feel your emotion, we feel the love you have for her. You say she's being reunited with Prince Philip, and certainly that sense of humour, that twinkle in her eyes was mostly safe for him, was it not? And I'm sure you witnessed that at first hand. David Robinson, former Royal Protection Officer to Her Majesty the Queen, we much appreciate you telling us your recollections and your fond remembrances at that time. Thank you.
Well, here at Buckingham Palace, people are continuing to come and gather to pay tribute, some bringing flowers, perhaps a single stem, sometimes a big bouquet, and wanting to gather to pay tribute. I've got Sir Anthony Seldon here with me throughout the morning, and in a moment we'll be reflecting on what she's meant to the nation, but also what she's meant internationally, her global reach as well. But first, let's take a look at the moment that the news of Her Majesty's death was brought to people around the world.
This is CNN Breaking News.
I want to go straight to London.
The Queen has passed away. The Queen died peacefully, the royal family says, at Balmoral this afternoon.
Breaking news. Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch, has died at the age of 96.
70 évnyi uralkodás után meghalt második Erzsébet angol királynő.
The sad news of England's Queen Elizabeth II's death.
La reina murió pacíficamente en Balmoral esta tarde, hora local. El rey y la reina consorte permanecerán en Balmoral esta noche y regresarán a Londres mañana.
Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch, dies at the age of 96.
So let's take a look now at some of the words of condolence that have been left by world leaders. And in a message to King Charles, the Russian President Vladimir Putin said, "I wish you courage and resilience in the face of this difficult, irreparable loss. May I ask you to pass on sincere condolences and support to members of the royal family and the entire people of Great Britain." Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeted to say, "It's with deep sadness that we learned of the death of Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. On behalf of the UAE people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire United Kingdom and the Commonwealth over this irreparable loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with you." And Pope Francis said, "I willingly join all who mourn her loss in praying for the late Queen's eternal rest and in paying tribute to her life of unstinting service to the good of the nation and the Commonwealth." Well, from the Empire State to Christ the Redeemer, landmarks around the world have paid homage to the Queen. The Eiffel Tower went dark in tribute to Her Majesty. The monument's Twitter page said, "In homage to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, I will not twinkle and will turn off at midnight tonight." In Brazil, Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro can be seen lit up in red and blue. The Empire State Building in New York shines purple and silver for Her Majesty. And here in the UK, a tribute was displayed on the iconic Piccadilly Circus billboards. Well, the contemporary historian, Sir Anthony Seldon, is here with me, and we got a real sense of the Queen's reach, if you like, not just across this nation, but around the world.
Isn't that incredible? Can you think of anyone, I can't, who would have died, who would have had that effect rippling across the world? I think it does underline that she is the most famous, but also the most respected leader in the world. So this moment that we're witnessing now, this pausing in history, is a deep sadness, not just for Britain, but is rippling around the whole world. Truly the world has lost somebody, a woman of quite extraordinary caliber, service, humanity, depth and quality.
We'll pick up with you again, no doubt, in just a moment, Anthony, but I want to hand over now to Rhiannon Mills, who has a developing line. Rhiannon.
Well, we understand that in the last few moments, cars have been seen leaving Balmoral, and in one of those cars, we understand, was the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, who we know purely by luck, was in this country with his wife Meghan this week, carrying out charity engagements, and yesterday with other members of the royal family was able to make that journey up to Aberdeenshire to be there and mark the moment of his grandmother's death. Of course, so much has been written in the last 18 months about the relationship between Prince Harry and other members of the family. However, I think it is worth reflecting on the words that the Queen always used, despite all of the difficulties involving the Sussexes deciding to step away from royal life. The Queen at all times described them as much loved members of the family. So you can only expect that other members of the family will have welcomed him yesterday, as they did for Prince Philip's funeral. Of course, he was there alongside other members of the royal family following the coffin at his funeral. And once again, he was there yesterday. We were told mid-afternoon yesterday that the Duchess of Sussex had decided not to travel up to Scotland, but now Prince Harry, it appears, is heading possibly on his way to Aberdeen Airport to head back to be reunited with his wife Meghan.
Rhiannon, thanks very much indeed. So we leave the scene there in Balmoral as people continue to arrive and lay flowers there. The place, of course, where the Queen died yesterday afternoon. It's a similar scene here at Buckingham Palace. The weather equally drizzly, the rain coming and going, and yet the crowds keep on coming. We're seeing, as you can see there, a mixture of ages. You've got young people, you've got older people, all with their own personal feelings about the passing of the Queen, but all of them feeling moved to come to the gates of Buckingham Palace and pay their respects. Some bringing flowers. You can see a number of them attached to the bars there of the palace. Quite a sombre mood there this morning. Last night there was a moment when people broke out into a spontaneous 3 cheers in celebration of the Queen's life. But people want to come and pay their own respects in their own way. We'll have full coverage throughout the morning here at Buckingham Palace. This is Sky News. A state of mourning begins around the UK following the death of the Queen.
King Charles III, now the monarch, is expected to leave Balmoral and address the nation on television this evening.
A remarkable Queen and inspiration to the world. As tributes pour in, we'll take you through the timetable of events, including gun salutes for every one of her 96 years.
And King Charles III starts his first full day as the new monarch, addressing the nation as king for the first time as world leaders remember the Queen.
Hello, good morning. The UK has begun a period of mourning after the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, marking the end of the Elizabethan era. Tributes have poured in from around the world after the news that the Queen had died at Balmoral. Her son is now the monarch. King Charles III will make his way from Balmoral to London this morning and is expected to address the nation on television later on today. Well, thousands continue to arrive to pay their respects here at Buckingham Palace. They began gathering even before the Queen's death was announced, following that statement that her doctors were concerned. Through today's show, we'll get reaction from those who worked with her and knew her, and we'll take you through what happens next. First, Alex Rossi reports on the end of an era and the start of a new chapter for the monarchy.
As the rain fell like mist, they came to pay their respects. But adjusting to the Queen's death after 7 decades on the throne will not be easy.
It's just heartbreaking, really, isn't it?
I feel like it's the end of an era. She was our one kind of staple in the country.
Has it sunk in?
No. I don't think so, no.
It is all the harder to absorb when you consider that only a few days ago Her Majesty was performing her royal duties. Her infectious smile present, as it had always been, during her long life of service. And within hours of the announcement, no one wanted to hear. Flowers were laid as people gravitated towards her main residence to be part of history.
Despite the weather and the late hour, it is the middle of the night. People are still arriving here at Buckingham Palace. And it's difficult to describe the atmosphere. There is a sense of shock and sadness, disbelief too, at the death of a revered monarch, the only one most people alive today can remember. But within these crowds, there is also something else, and that is a desire to celebrate a queen who's been a stabilising force for many decades.
For many, the Queen's extraordinary longevity had made her such a permanent feature in so many lives. She was an anchor through uncertain times as Britain transitioned through the modern age after the Second World War. But now, across the nations, uncertainty as new constitutional questions will be asked.
She was an influence for good in our country, and now she's gone. I wonder where we'll go.
It doesn't really feel real yet.
The lady was a very great woman and held the country together.
But in the midst of all this, there is a family dealing with tremendous loss. Prince Charles, who's now king, was the first to arrive by her side. Prince William soon followed, driving his uncles. They looked tired and worried. A few hours later, and the worst fears were confirmed. The Queen was dead.
The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built.
For the coming days, flags will remain lowered as a carefully choreographed transition of power begins, the new king making his way back to London this morning. And what all this will eventually mean for the monarchy and the country is very much unknown. But for now, there is still a rawness at the loss of such an enduring figure. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Central London.
Well, let's get some reaction now to the death of the Queen. I'm joined now by Cardinal Vincent Nichols, Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster. Cardinal Nichols, thanks very much indeed for joining us here this morning. Your thoughts on hearing of the passing of the Queen?
Well, like everybody else, mine, first of all, was a sense of shock because on Tuesday she'd been fulfilling her duties, and we read today that over the weekend she was full of life and full of fun. And then after that initial shock, a profound sadness that is just sweeping over this country, the Commonwealth, and as we hear this morning, so many different people and places around the world. For me personally, as David Robinson was saying before, the sense of the Queen's personal faith, her personal Christian faith, is just so central to this moment. She said, you know, that the teachings of Christ and her own accountability before God was the framework in which she tried to live her life. And somebody who does that approaches death in a very particular way. They know that this is a step, a transition to the fullness of life in the presence of God and reunited with her beloved Prince Philip. They're my thoughts at this moment.
Well, yes, I think I'm right in saying that I've seen you described her as a gift to the world.
Yes.
How would you sum her up, and what do you think she's meant to this country?
Well, she's a gift to the world, not simply in her longevity that she's lived through much, but it's the qualities that she's brought. In that photograph of her, the quality of joy in life, the quality to enjoy the good things, the horses, but also the stability through so many different traumas, both personal, international, and in her own personal life. And I think it's this stability, this wisdom, and this approachability. I've been at her side when she's met people One young priest wanted to talk to her about his memory of playing the recorder as a 10-year-old when she came to Wales. And she just accepted him, and he went away absolutely overjoyed, as it were, the way she'd affirmed him. So she had this gift to put people at ease, to strengthen us, and to be steady throughout her life. And again, I say, we mustn't forget where this came from. These qualities came from her faith. That was its source and her inspiration. And while we pay great tribute to her, let's not forget where those gifts come from, because they can come to us as well if we go there.
And it's interesting you talk about her importance in terms of her constancy, and that she was there at a time when the country may have been going through some turbulence. Now her own death is a real shock for the nation. How do you see your role and other religious leaders in trying to reassure people and try to instill a sense of stability again?
Well, I think every family, when faced with a death of a loved one, goes through certain rituals and routines which help them, first of all, to gather, secondly, to remember, thirdly, to express.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Jingo. Subscribe on Jesse Media.
Brings this life of our loved one to its fullness in his presence. So as a nation, we find ways of doing that. The rituals will be there. We will be coming together in all sorts of different ways. There will be these solemn moments of prayer and manage their daily life, can pause and open themselves to that